Hello, everyone. I wanted to do a review video for the week 2 study questions on Ecclesiastes. I want to say something I said in the first review question video, and that is that in the first part of the course, these videos probably really aren't that important in the sense that, or for the reason that the kind of questions that I'm asking you, because of the nature of material, are really open-ended, opinion-based questions, and it's really it's not really necessary for me to give you a notion of correct, so-called correct answers, because there really kind of aren't any. I mean, as long as you've read the material and you have a response, that's really all I'm asking. But I wanted to get in the habit of doing this because later on, it will be important, I think, to review questions and to suggest correct answers as the material gets, well, more difficult, but also changes in nature, where we're actually doing philosophy rather than reading a moral discourse. Sorry, I had to pause there. I mean, the review questions at this point are, I think, in keeping with the nature of the material, and that is open-ended. There's no really correct answer. The answers should be informed. They should be informed by a reading of the text, knowledge of the text, but they are purposely open-ended. That the questions will change as we go along. So I wanted to get in the habit of making these videos every week, going over study questions so that I can shape out answers in the videos and that you can ask yourself whether you're in the same territory as me. Right now, again, that's not really that important. But as we go on, I think it will. Number one, what do you think the preacher means when he says that all is vanity? This is, of course, the great motto, the great saying, the great expression of Ecclesiastes, that all is vanity. Other translations, more contemporary, this is the King James translation from the 1600s, but more contemporary translations say everything is meaningless instead of all is vanity. I don't know if that quite captures the same idea as all is vanity, but that essentially life is futile, I think, is the common idea that everything that we do is kind of a joke. I mean, to put it bluntly, because ultimately it doesn't matter. You know, the life of every human being is so short, and our capacity or our ability to learn and accomplish anything during that time is so limited that that it really doesn't matter. I mean, I guess, right? I mean, I'm not advocating this point of view, but it certainly is a surprising one to find. And that's at least my take on it. Like, all this is just my take on it. Number two, despite believing it all is vanity, the preacher still believes it's important to live an ethical life. Why? Well, I don't know. That's just an honest question. You know, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you think that ultimately that life is meaningless and it doesn't matter what you do, then I suppose you could then go on to argue that it doesn't matter whether you live ethically or not. The preacher certainly doesn't believe that. And I think that in the background, there is a belief in God here. And there is a belief that God expects you to act justly, I suppose. I mean, that's my only answer, is that even though ultimately a human life is a vain thing, God still expects you to act ethically, to do what's right within the limitations of that life. I suppose that is some kind of answer, but I don't know if it's even a good answer. Number three, one of the reasons that the preacher believes that all is vanity is the shortness of human life and the fact we will all eventually be forgotten. I mean, the preacher, the writer, calls himself the preacher in Ecclesiastes, is always, talking about the shortness of human life and the fact that the people of yesterday who thought they were great have largely been forgotten, and the people today who think they're great will largely be forgotten in the future, and we all will. And Well, do you agree that this is a challenge living a meaningful life? Why or why not? I suppose that that question really depends upon what you regard to be necessary to live a meaningful life, right? If your aspirations or your hopes for the kind of impact your life will make are high, then perhaps it's a very great challenge to living a meaningful life. I mean, if you're, let's just say your great aspiration, your central goal in life is to write a great novel, and you spend years and years working on this novel. You want it to be, part of the canon of world literature. But after years and years of working, you realize that you don't have any talent. I mean, that it's not good. I mean, well, if your whole life is sort of predicated on writing a great novel and you realize you never will, then I suppose that there's a big question about the ultimate meaning of your life, which may be a kind of a message not to depend on such things to find meaning in life. I don't know. But we should remind ourselves that continually in Ecclesiastes, when he begins to think, or when they begin to think this way, he or she, who knows who wrote it, really, that the preacher continually says, well, there's nothing more than to take the pleasures you can in eating and drinking and in your work, in your labor. So I don't know if he or they think that living a meaningful life can consist in just eating and drinking and taking some enjoyment in your work. If that makes a meaningful life, or that is simply a solace for not living a meaningful life. I mean, it really depends on what your interpretation of it is. Moving on to the second set of study questions. The preacher says that the race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. What is he getting at? I'll admit to you that I put that question in there just because I wanted to dwell on this beautiful passage in Ecclesiastes. In a work of literature, Ecclesiastes, I mean, we may question whether we agree with the outlook on human life that Ecclesiastes sketches out for us, but I don't think we can deny that it's a great piece of literature. And great pieces of literature are made partly just from great passages that are so memorable and striking, and this is one of them. The race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, et cetera, but time and chance rule all things. It's just such a striking poetic thing. I guess I just wanted an excuse to read it over again and talk about it, but I think its meaning is fairly obvious. Life is not fair, and the most deserving do not always get the accolades and rewards. It would make sense if the swift always won the race, but they don't. They trip, or somebody else cheats, or there's somebody else who's even swifter. I don't know. Like I said, that wouldn't make sense. Nor the battle to the strong. Life doesn't always work out the way that you expect, and life isn't fair. And I think it's an important lesson, especially for those of us who you can work hard at something and really dedicate yourself to achieving something and not achieve it, even though you by all rights you kind of deserve to get it, but you don't always get it. You don't always get that job, or get into that relationship, or make that amount of money, or succeed in an artistic or political or social endeavor that you're dedicated to. You may become a political activist and really try to change society for the better, and fail. Even though you worked really hard and you were probably really right in your cause, it may fail, and that's true. It doesn't mean you will always fail. He doesn't say the race is never to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. He says it's not always, or they say it's not always to the swift. Not always. The battle's not always to the strong. So I don't know. I just think it's a fantastic passage in Ecclesiastes. Pick out one piece of advice from this reading what you think is particularly good and explain why you chose it. Obviously, I just want you to think about the reading um, and paired with the third question to pick out a piece of advice in the reading which you disagree with and explain why is just really a companion to the second question. And there's no reason for me to pick one out. It doesn't matter. It just matters what you picked out. Um, I think one of the ones that I really remember that somebody picked out from that she thought was good advice was that it's better to be a dead dog. I mean, better to be a live dog than a dead lion, and that is such a memorable piece of advice, and also just so disturbing in a way. Um, I think that somebody else picking out something that they disagreed with picked out the money answers all things quote, which is really interesting to see in the Bible. A defense of money, about the value of money and how it's really good to have a lot of money, or at least some money, which is totally antithetical to what we'll read in the Sermon on the Mount next week. So I gave you those two little questions to pick out one piece of advice that you agreed with and one you disagreed with as a kind of a signal that I do want you to be critical of these texts. You don't have to agree with everything. Hopefully, you'll find something in it that responds to something that you think you probably believe, but you don't have to agree with everything. And we should be critical, especially in a work which is giving us ethical advice. It's probably not a very common experience that we agree with everything in that text.